Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. Today we're diving into a tense turning point with James and Diep, where one honest confession changes everything. James reveals he's no longer chasing a lawsuit against his father, choosing a quieter life instead, but Diep isn't sure if that choice is courage or surrender. As they talk under the dim porch light, old fear collides with new hope, and their fragile peace feels like it could break at any second. If you enjoy emotional stories with romance, tension, and shocking twists, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. I'm not going to sue my father. The sentence landed between them like a blade laid gently on a table, quiet, deliberate, impossible to pretend it wasn't there. Diep's fingers froze around the woven basket. Late afternoon light slipped through the bamboo slats, striping the floor in warm gold, but her face turned colder than the coming night. James stood on the porch with dust under his nails, small cuts across his knuckles, and a calm that didn't match the words he'd just confessed. For a moment, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. You? What? Diep's voice stayed controlled, but the edge in it was real. Say that again. James didn't look away. His jaw tightened. Not in anger, more like a man forcing himself not to retreat. I stopped collecting evidence, he said. I'm done chasing a lawsuit. I'm done trying to drag him into court. Diep stared at him like she was searching for the hidden reason behind the truth. You were risking everything for that, she said. You were hiding, digging, connecting pieces. You told me it was the only way to stop him. I know. James swallowed once. I meant it then. Then why now? Her hands tightened on the basket rim. Did he threaten you? Did someone find you? No. James shook his head quickly, almost offended by the idea. No one found me. No threats. The quiet stretched. A rooster called once somewhere far off, then silence again. Diep's eyes narrowed, frustration mixing with something that looked like fear she refused to name. So what changed? She asked. James rubbed his thumb along his index finger, a nervous habit that only returned when something mattered too much. He glanced past the bamboo fence toward the orchard, where the sky was turning amber, as if he could borrow courage from the fading light. I changed, he said. Diep let out a slow breath. That's not an explanation. It is, James replied softly. Just not the kind you wanted. Say it, Diep demanded, quieter now. The kind of quiet that meant she was bracing herself. James faced her fully. He's my father, he said, and I hate what he's done. I hate what he's capable of, but the more I chased him, the more I felt myself turning into someone I didn't recognize. Diep's expression didn't soften. You were becoming someone who fights back. I was becoming someone who lives only to fight, James corrected, voice steady but low. I woke up thinking about traps. I went to sleep imagining every way it could go wrong. Even when I was beside you, I wasn't really here. That hit something in Diep's eyes, just a flicker, quick as a crack in glass. James lifted his hands slightly, showing the small cuts. These last days working with my hands, sweating under the sun, coming back to this porch, I remembered what it feels like to be a person, not a weapon. Diep's gaze dropped to his bruised knuckles, then lifted again. And you think you can just choose peace? I'm not pretending it's easy, James said. I'm saying I don't want him living inside my head forever. Peace isn't just the absence of danger. It's the absence of that hunger to destroy someone else. Diep leaned forward. If you stop, he wins. James's eyes didn't flinch. If I stop living like a hunted man, I win. If I stop measuring my days by his shadow, I win. Diep's lips parted, then closed. She looked down at the vegetables, at the ordinary basket, like normal life suddenly felt fragile in her hands. James reached to the side and placed a small brown paper bundle beside her. I want to keep living like this, he said. Work in the day, rest at night, come home to something real. Diep's voice sharpened. Something real? Meaning me? James nodded once, slow and honest. You and... He hesitated, then pushed through it. And Ly, too. Even when she's not here, she's in my mind every time I think about the future. At Ly's name, Diep's throat moved like she swallowed something painful. She looked away toward the path beyond the fence, as if expecting consequences to appear out of the dark. Then she looked back at him with no warmth yet, only precision. You're asking me to believe this is courage, she said, not weakness? I'm asking you to watch me, James replied. Not tonight, not with promises, with days. The first hint of night settled over the bamboo house. The quiet between them wasn't cold anymore, but it wasn't safe either. It was a bridge half built. Diep's eyes held him, sharp and steady. If you stopped collecting evidence, she said carefully, then what did you do with what you already had? Diep didn't raise her voice. That was what made it heavier. If you stopped collecting evidence, she said, what did you do with what you already had? The porch bulb above them buzzed like an insect trapped in glass, spilling weak light over James's hands. His knuckles were scraped, nails dark from soil and wood, the marks of a man who tried to trade fury for honest fatigue. He stared at Diep for a moment, as if deciding whether the truth would calm her or cut her deeper. Then he slid his hand into his jacket and pulled out a thin envelope creased, worn at the corners, the kind of thing you keep close when you don't trust the world. I didn't destroy it, he said. Diep's eyes narrowed. Then where is it? Not here, James answered. Not on me. Not anywhere my father can reach with one phone call or one person he buys. Diep's jaw tightened. So you're not suing, but you're keeping a weapon. James shook his head slowly. It's not a weapon. His voice dropped. It's a line I don't want to cross unless he forces me. He held the envelope out, but Diep didn't take it immediately. Her fingers hovered, then curled back, as if touching it would drag them right back into those nights of whispering, hiding, counting footsteps outside the bamboo house. You're asking me to believe this is courage, she said, not surrender. I'm asking you to believe I'm trying to survive, James replied, and for the first time his calm cracked enough to show the exhaustion underneath. When I was chasing him, I stopped being a person. I made a plan, a trap, a countdown. Diep's gaze flicked to his bruised knuckles and stayed there a beat too long. James let out a breath that sounded like relief and grief at the same time. These last days, I worked, I ate, I slept. He glanced toward the orchard where darkness had swallowed the last color of evening. It felt normal. And I realized something. Diep's eyes lifted again. What? I don't want my father to be the reason I exist, James said. Even if I win in court, he still wins if he owns my mind. Diep's face hardened, but her voice softened by accident. And what about justice? James didn't flinch. Justice matters, he said, but not at the cost of losing myself completely. Not at the cost of dragging you through fire every day just so I can say I didn't back down. A long silence settled between them. The wind pushed through bamboo leaves with a soft, restless hiss. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then stopped. Diep finally reached out and took the envelope. She held it like it was fragile, like it could shatter the thin piece they'd been building with their hands. "What is it?" she asked. "Copies," James said. "Not everything, just enough that I can't be erased, enough that if he tries something, he'll know I'm not helpless." Diep's fingers tightened around the paper. "So you're still afraid?" James gave a small nod. "I'd be stupid not to be." He looked at her, and his eyes were steady, even if his voice wasn't. "But fear doesn't have to be my engine anymore." Diep swallowed. "And you said you wanted to live like this, with me." "Yes." James didn't hesitate. "With you beside me." "And Ly?" Diep asked, and the way she said the name sounded like a test she didn't want him to fail. James's expression softened. "Ly deserves steadiness," he said quietly. "Not a man who shows up carrying danger like a shadow. If I'm going to be part of her world at all, I want to be someone who brings calm, someone she can trust." Diep's eyes glistened, then sharpened again. She wasn't crying, she was fighting not to. "You can't promise safety," she whispered. "I'm not promising the world won't hurt us," James replied. "I'm promising I won't invite the storm in just because I'm angry. I won't chase destruction when peace is still possible." Diep stared at him, breathing slow, like she was trying to decide whether this version of him was real or temporary. "One mistake," she said softly. "One sign you're lying to yourself, and I'll drag you back into that fight, whether you want it or not." James nodded once. "Fair." Diep's mouth opened to say more, then she stopped. Her head turned slightly toward the fence line. From beyond the bamboo, footsteps crunched on gravel. Slow, measured. Too close to be a stranger passing by. Diep's grip tightened around the envelope. James's entire body went still, not with panic, with recognition. And in the thin porch light, the quiet life they'd been reaching for suddenly felt as delicate as paper in the wind.
James khiến Diệp sửng sốt khi thừa nhận anh sẽ không kiện cha mình nữa và ngừng thu thập bằng chứng. Anh giải thích rằng việc theo đuổi trả thù này đã chiếm lấy anh. Anh biến thành người chỉ sống vì chiến đấu. Thay vào đó, anh muốn một cuộc sống giản dị, làm việc ban ngày, nghỉ ngơi ban đêm và một tương lai với Diệp. Sự ổn định của Nhi trong tâm trí dù cô bé không xuất hiện. Diệp phản đối, lo sợ cha mình rằng sẽ thắng nếu James nhượng bộ. James khẳng định anh đang chọn hòa bình mà không trở nên bất lực. Anh tiết lộ anh không tiêu hủy bằng chứng, anh giữ lại các bản sao được giấu kín, nhưng một biện pháp bảo vệ cuối cùng chứ không phải vũ khí. Cuối cùng Diệp chấp nhận phong bì thư, nhưng cảnh báo anh một sai lầm sẽ phải quay trở lại cuộc chiến, rồi tiếng bước chân đến hàng rào tre.